War is based on perception, on reality, in almost all situations. When I was over Christmas break, I was with a couple of friends, and I watched this fantastic video or show called Generation War. And before we watched, my friend asked me, he said, "What do you think this is about?" Just based on the title. I said, "Maybe some people in the future where like the whole world is at war or something," right? He said, "Good guess, but no. It's actually about Germans in World War II under basically the same scenario in which the whole world is at war." Now, these German soldiers, they're charging east. They're going into the Russian Soviet territory. So, and you see it from their perspective. It's in German, and it's a bunch of soldiers, a nurse, and some other characters. Now, these soldiers who, from our perspective, and by our perspective I mean the American or Western perspective, are considered the enemy. Now, they're charging east, they're fighting the Soviets, they're not fighting France and the Americans and the British, so they're less of an enemy, so to say, but it's still part of the same German machine. Now, what you see is that these German soldiers are conflicted. They're humans, just like everybody else. The show starts with them just having a party, just like a bunch of college kids, drinking, dancing, being in love, playing music, all those things. And then when war ramps up, they start charging east, and they think it'll be this glorious and great and short thing. They'll be home by Christmas in 1941. And as it goes along, it turns out not to be that way. So they were lied to. Either lied to, persuaded, or whatever by Hitler that we need to do this, this is good for our country, this is what we need, and you need to go and do this. And they committed atrocities that they were abhorred by. All of them. All of the main characters could not believe what they were doing. But they kept charging, they kept doing it because they're part of this machine. They're part of this machine that had overtaken all of them. Then, of course, once they start invading Russia, what do the Russians need to do? They need to fight back. The Russians need to start arming up, and they need to start legitimately defending their country. And in the process, 20 million Russians died. Russia was destroyed in World War II. And according to John F. Kennedy in his peace speech, a third of the country's industrial land, no, 2/3 of its industrial land was turned into a wasteland, and 1/3 of its total territory was turned into a wasteland. A destruction the equivalent of, in this country, in America, the whole territory east of Chicago. That is the hellishness that was created essentially by, I wouldn't say ideology, because there's an ideology, but then there's the manner in which you act on that ideology. So the Germans became extremely aggressive, and no individual German exactly could stop it. If they deserted the war and they were found, they'd be executed. You know, they had to do they captured some Soviet soldiers, and then our main character, there's this scene. Well, he's at a lake. He's orders to take this guy out to the lake and kill him, and he doesn't want to. He's like, "Oh, why? This guy's like surrendered. We've questioned him. There's nothing to do with him. Why? We don't need to." And then his commander says, "The orders are the orders," right? And the thinking behind that is fear-based. Is that, and it's not to say it's incorrect, because in this whole war scenario, all decency and goodness is completely thrown out the window, and fear is how you win. So basically, every single Soviet soldier, of course, is a threat to the Germans, so they need to take every single one out, of course. Even though the guy surrendered, they decided, instead of imprisoning him or whatever, or just letting him go, which probably would have been a bad idea, but instead of doing anything else, they just executed him. That's the easiest way to make sure this guy's no longer a threat, though he's surrendered, though he's been captured and interrogated and stuff. So then our character takes him out to the lake, river, whatever. They have that moment. He points the gun at the back of his head, and the music is building, 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 building. And it crescendos. It gets to the top of the music, right? And then there's that moment of conscience where the soldier's like, no, I can't do this. The music crescendos and it stops. Like, and the soldier, there's that moment where the soldier would be like, right when his finger's on the trigger, I can't do this. This is not right. But 3 seconds later, he shoots him. There was no moment of conscience. I mean, I'm sure he had a moment of conscience. I'm sure the whole thing was a moment of conscience. But again, he had to follow his orders. So basically, and this Soviet was only a threat because the Germans were invading them to begin with, and the Soviets were fighting back and trying to prevent themselves from being taken over. Now, that being said, the Germans lost that front of the war. They lost both fronts of the war, the West and the East. And once the Soviets actually overturned them, instead of being defensive, the Soviets became aggressive. And then they took over Eastern Germany. And they were more brutal than the Germans. They'd go to hospitals, they'd shoot everybody, all the prisoners of war, all the soldiers that are there. They were barbaric. So what one of the main characters said is, this war will do nothing but bring out the worst in each of us. And so it did. Now, my point in saying this is this. There is no reason, no real reason for the Germans to act out as they did. In Hitler's insane way of trying to overcompensate for how badly they were treated in the World War I treaties, post-World War I, he tried to make the country essentially the world dominators, and took this small little country in the middle of Europe and tried to expand it through the whole world. And he was stretched too thin, and he failed. He failed in the West, he failed in the East, and then Germany became completely even worse than it was before he came into power. Now, my point in bringing all this up is that he was able to convince the people that this was necessary and that these extremely aggressive actions were for the good of Germany. He was able to make their perceptions believe that, and then make them commit atrocities in that manner. And then, of course, once they start viewing other people as enemies, what happens? They attack the Soviets, and then the Soviets attack back. Now, the Soviets are actually the enemies now, right? The Soviets are murdering Germans. That's enemy. That's the work of an enemy. So then it intensifies and intensifies. And my point in bringing this up is to say that, and this is just one example of many wars that have happened through history. I can't say on the whole that war is unnecessary or bad. I mean, it's happened. That's for sure. It's factual that it has happened. Most people would like to see it not happen. And some wars are necessary, perhaps. Maybe there is no diplomatic solution for things, right? But most wars are not. Most wars are generally just because people are too much in their minds, too much having been crafting their perceptions in a manner that allows them to then commit atrocities or support the committing of atrocities. So it's based on perception, just like everything. You know, let's say, like, take this scene you're viewing right now, me with trees and beautiful stuff around me. That's the reality of the situation. But in my mind, who knows what could be happening? I could be miserable. I could be thinking about the negative stuff from the past, anticipating negative stuff in the future, planning whatever I'm planning, you see? Even though this actual situation is very benign. It's beautiful, actually. You see? But my perceptions will create my reality. Your perceptions will create your reality. And the perceptions of the people around the world will create their realities. And there's nothing wrong with ideology. There's nothing wrong with, of whatever sort, more or less at least. There's nothing wrong with anything exactly. But it's when you start combining and arranging them in a way that becomes harmful and destructive that it becomes bad. So, for example, there are a lot of people who are good at exploiting this, whether they be in the government, in marketing, in any institution, in businesses, in families, your local bully, whatever it is. And if they can intuitively understand what you love and what you fear, and they can threaten what you love and therefore make you fear you're going to lose what you love, they're able to use you for whatever their agendas may be. And that will very often be laced in to the type of words that they speak. They'll very often be there as an undercurrent. What they say could be true, right? There's always an element of truth, and it could be totally true. And it could be totally true, and then they legitimately get you on their side, and it's a good thing. But there could be an element of manipulation as well, in which they're not really telling the full truth, and then you end up going in based on false premises, and then you become fodder, so to say. Not fodder, but the people in that war were fodder. But you become whatever pawn that person wants you to be. And it's very easy to see this. Let's say we have an opposing side, whether it's another country, another political party, another religion, whatever it may be. It's very easy to, another family, another football team, another whatever. It's very easy to see what's happening on their side, how their people might be being manipulated, how they this, how they that. And then we feel we need to protect ourselves, right? And it's good to see that. That's good. That's a good step. And the next step is to look inwards. How am I being manipulated, if at all? What are my fears that I'm subconsciously operating on? What am I doing with respect to the way that I treat people that might not be good, and that could be as a result of all the fears that I have? What am I a part of, and how helpful is it? These are questions to think about for yourself and for others, and it's a very complex and nuanced thing, because you can't boil it down to something as simple as ideology. You can't boil it down to something as simple as anything, really. It just takes a very, very deep look, and that takes a lot of internal work, so to say. But it's a necessary thing if we're to stop a war. And not just war, but not just physical wars, which are bad, but like heightened conflicts that don't need to exist. If we're to work on actually building consensus among people, if we're willing to stop ourselves from bullying others and stop ourselves from getting bullied, and all the good things that can arise. And just remember that it all stems from perception. That's not to say that the reality is not there, but we are perceiving it through our perception. It's a very, very, very important distinction to make. And again, how flawed a perception can be. This scene right here, this is a beautiful scene. Beautiful scene. Trees, clouds, nice weather, everything is fine. But in my perceptions, might not be. My perceptions could be horrible at this time, or they could be great. You see, there's always something on the outside that your perceptions, if you're a very fearful person, you'll see one little threat and you'll think about it for hours. See, that's a false perception. That's a type of perception that can create war. So I laid out a lot of negative things about perception and war and whatever, and I finished the video and I'm recording a second segment here, which is to say, to give the solution, which is that your body, it's not your body, your mind is largely conditioned, and a lot of the principles, not all, but a lot of them are not inherent to anything that actually matters in reality. It can matter for where you were in the past, it can matter for what you think the future is going to be, it can matter for a lot of things that exist in your mind. But in spirituality, you're neither this form nor that form in total. You're the formless spirit. So similarly, you can change your perceptions, but you can't do it while with the same attachment to your mind and identity. You have to let that subside a little bit and allow deeper knowledge to come in. And you can do it. That doesn't mean to reverse your ideologies. It doesn't mean anything except to look inside and then see and then let your internal wisdom derivate and then come to the surface. Through that, you can change. Without overcompensating, without undercompensating, without being stuck, without going off the deep end. And you may go off the deep end from time to time, but you can, if you do it correctly, come to a proper center, a balance of fantastic wisdom. And then therein ends the war within you. And therein, when more people do it, ends the war outside.